Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neil C. Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast. Now, in a world where consumers now want brands to have the same values as them, I want to learn more how brands can authentically and strategically connect with consumers using technology, and also how brands and businesses should plan to adapt and evolve and get ahead of the trends around the metaverse and Web3. And let's be honest, Web3 is where it's at, so I'm really interested in this one because I think there's a lot of hype and buzzwords around these topics, but I think we're on a path where there's no going back. So it'd be great to hear more how businesses can adapt and learn what they should be doing. So today I've invited Robert Helstrom from Sightly onto the podcast to learn more about all this, along with the current trends within AdTech and marketing and so much more. So buckle up and hold on tight as I beam your ears all the way to San Diego, where Robert is waiting to speak with us now. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell the listeners a little about your journey, how you got here, and ultimately your origin story?
Thank you, Neil. Sure. I started out as a writer, mainly interested in filmmaking and technology when I went to college, and got a couple of degrees in communications, both in media and then in communication theory, film theory. And after school, I worked in marketing and communications for a number of companies over the years. And it seemed like I was always applying tech to solve problems. So some of the companies I worked for are Polaroid, the Federal Reserve, 20th Century Fox, a great little ad agency in Madison, Wisconsin called Hebing, Anderson Windows. I started my own video marketing automation company. And then most recently, for the past 9 years here at Sightly, a lot of different experiences and perspectives over the years that have allowed me to, I guess, appreciate both the strategic and the tactical aspects of business and marketing, especially during times of change, which seems to be always. Anyway.
Yeah, you're not kidding. And what I love about your story now is you were talking about filmmaking, writing, marketing, communications, but it was technology that was at the heart of all those roles. Is tech something you've always been passionate about?
Yes, it is. So I grew up, I had, my mom was a creative person. She was an artist, a painter. My dad was more of a technologist and a business person. He was a computer scientist. Back in the day, they called it, in terms of how it was applied in business, management information systems. And so he had his own business for a while, worked for a variety of companies, in the early days of computing, let's call it. So I was always fascinated with it from, my dad, watching what my dad was doing and trying to understand it. And it just happened to have a bit of a proficiency for it. So
from there, if we fast forward to present day, you're now helping brands anticipate the unexpected with Sightly. But can you set the scene and tell the listeners a little bit more about exactly what Sightly is and how you're helping brands with technology once again?
Well, today, I guess because every company has its journey too, just like we do. Today, Sightly helps your brand define and centralize its true perspective so that you can put it in a market with speed at scale through your marketing, media activation, intelligence activities, etc. So it's a lot of jargon, and break that down a little bit. Yeah. And we help brands in three main ways. First, number one, we work with brands to know themselves deeply, what their values and aspirations are, where they really align with their customers on things, how they want to respond to certain scenarios that we see occurring in the world today. And then we centralize all that as a single source of truth, or call it a system of record, whatever, that they can use as a touchstone for all their strategic and tactical activities. Much like Salesforce has become the single source of truth for customer information, our platform does that for brands. We call it the brand mentality platform. The second important thing we do is we help brands make sense of everything that's happening in the world at any given moment, or any information that a brand would get from its own sources. And based on that mentality, so we do that by constantly processing a massive stream of data from social listening, news APIs, media, like we are a partner in the YouTube measurement program, for example, and we apply the brand's mentality like a filter to that data. And then the third thing comes next is that we tell you what to do immediately, again, based on that mentality. So we take all that data, we filter it through your lens, if you will, your mentality profile, what we call it. And we are able to help you avoid risky moments and stories and trends and take advantage of all the opportunities that we see that arise every day as well. And so our pedigree, we also do full service media activation. So we can actually use these insights in a full service environment to plan, execute, manage digital media campaigns across a variety of channels, like primarily video. So YouTube, TikTok, live streaming, esports, CTV, OTT, Roku, and then other media as well, like Meta, Waze, Snap, etc.
And before you came on the podcast today, just for anyone that's listening and hearing about you for the first time, I was doing a bit of research, and what really stood out was that you're widely considered to be this disruptive technology platform that's aimed at helping brands hold themselves to a higher accountability standard. But can you expand on that and how and why you're considered this disruptive technology platform? And is that a label that you particularly like?
Yes, it is. I think we sort of the whole team, and this is an amazing team. And I've had a 40-year career in business, and as we talked earlier, worked across a variety of business types and industries. This is one amazing team, I must say. So, I think we're all of that mindset. We all kind of share that mentality. So if you were to and we have done this, of course, done our own mentality profile. Being somewhat of a disruptor is kind of core to who we are, both as individuals and as a brand. So, to answer your question, I think there's two major challenges that we see today. The first one we call the speed and mayhem challenge, where things are just moving so fast and faster all the time, getting more complex, more nuanced. So you take a situation like the war in Ukraine, for example, or even on a much smaller scale, what happened at the Oscars a few weeks ago. We call these moments, all of these things, moments, by the way. And most brands would want to blanket avoid these moments in terms of where they were marketing, how they were marketing, what were they responding to, where were they placing their messages adjacent to, et cetera. But there could be opportunities depending upon your brand's mentality. But the real question is, how do you gear up to respond to all this as it's happening and respond to all the complexities in real time? Because the legacy systems that are out there really don't support that necessarily, if you think about it. We have a stat that our data science team came up with it based on all the trends we've been monitoring over the last year and a half or so, that the average length of a trend is 34 hours, comes and goes. So that's an average, right? The mean. But when you look at there's some that last longer, like the ones we were just talking about. But then when you look at the traditional sort of process for making changes in a media campaign, for example, that takes days. It takes 7-8 days at times, as long as that, to make a change to a campaign. So there's this gap there between the ability to respond in real time that exists, that I think we're helping to fulfill. So that's the first challenge. The second challenge, which really kind of gets to the point that you were asking about, is that more and more consumers are making purchases based on brands' values, right? Yeah. According to one recent study that we cite in our white paper and on the website, 82% of Americans would pay for a more value-aligned brand, which is pretty significant because as younger consumers grow in influence, brands have to be more focused on the values that they hold and demonstrate. But they don't just want to chase, popular sentiment, because consumers can smell when brands are being disingenuous or worse, pandering, right? So they want to be true. They want to be authentic. And more, this is becoming important. You're starting to see a lot more discussion out there about values and brand values, and a lot of people are starting to pay attention to this in our industry. And this we think is the reason why. The challenge is that there appears to be kind of this feeling that there's an either or proposition of show me the money or do the right thing. And we feel like there's a way to do both. That there's a middle road there that we're focused on, where doing the right thing actually helps show you the money, because if you're aligned with your consumers on values, as these studies are starting to show, it's going to translate into purchasing, and I think this will continue. This trend will continue. So that. That's how, by knowing themselves deeply and defining themselves deeply and using those values as part of that touchstone, that's kind of their source of truth, their system of record to do everything that they're doing in market, to guide that, is basically their way to brands' ways to sort of be accountable to those values. In an authentic way and a consistent way. So having that, sort of base or that core allows you to share it across all of your functions. So you're not as siloed as you used to be, and with external partners. So any agencies that you use or solutions providers that you use as a brand can use that same touchstone, if you will. So you're basically being authentic and consistent with that authenticity. So that's the idea.
So many great points in that. And I often sympathise from brands, because in one corner you've got consumers who now are increasingly only want to purchase from brands that hold the same set of values as them. But equally, as you said, they can smell anyone that's being disingenuous or pandering to them. And we are in a world where brands, because of that, might self-censor, because some are even afraid of, if they do try and do or say the right thing, they'll be accused of virtue signalling, greenwashing, and so many other different things. So can you tell me a little bit more about how brands can effectively look to lean into controversy rather than away from it?
Sure. So I think part of what we've seen as we've been dissecting and analyzing the data on these moments as they arise and live and then fall away, is that, depending upon the moment, some of the ones that we're familiar with, the ones that we can use as examples, like the Joe Rogan Spotify blow up there, the Aaron Rodgers coming out and when he got COVID, and the examination of what he had said about whether he had been vaccinated or not, turning into a big to-do. Those kinds of moments, and what happened at the Oscars with Will Smith and Chris Rock altercation, etc. Those kinds of moments that we see, that we remember, have some legs. They go for a while, and they develop different tangents. One of the ones we use as an example was the Tiger Woods accident that occurred over a year ago now. So the first part of that story, if you remember, was the fact that he had this accident, and it was a terrible accident, and there was a lot of conjecture about whether or not he was potentially driving under the influence, whether he was how badly he was hurt, whether he was going to play again, et cetera. But a couple of days into the story, or several days into the story, YouTube creator posted a video about the car that he had been driving, the Genesis SUV, and how it basically saved his life. And suddenly the story took this turn to be about Genesis SUV. So what we say is, like, if you are a brand, an automotive brand that's a competitor of Genesis, or you're the brand manager of Genesis, for example, you're probably staying away from this story because it's not a story that anybody wants to be around in terms of the type of news it is. It's not positive news. But then when it takes this turn, it has a different flavor to it. Now you want to be involved in that. You want to be engaged in that. And then when you look at that story and how it evolved even further towards the end of, I guess, the beginning of this year, when he was working with his son to play in a tournament, and then he came back and played in the Masters. Now it becomes a story about parenting, or there's a certain redemption element to it that maybe you want to lean into if you're another brand. We looked at the Ukraine war from that lens too when it first broke out, and we had a lot of clients coming to us and asking us for a point of view on this situation. And we were saying, if you are a client of ours and you've already filled out your mentality profile, you're good. We know how you feel about these situations, because some of the scenarios that we have in there are directly related to what's going on here. And your values that you've expressed are related to what's going on here. So we're blocking, or we're targeting based upon your profile. That's how that works. So some of the areas where you would target, for example, might be, let's say, if you're an electric vehicle manufacturer or dealer, and there's all these stories that are around the Ukraine conflict, especially early on, about how gas prices were rising and oil prices were rising because of the conflict. Now, those stories might be something that you want to lean into. Yes, it's a controversy, but it's something that is really relevant to your brand, that you've previously decided that this is a story that we want to be close to because of who we are and what we're trying to accomplish, what our outcomes are, what our values are. So those are a couple of examples how you can do that.
And as this is a tech podcast, I've got to ask, how do you think brands can adapt and evolve to get away to get ahead of the old metaverse and Web3 trends at the moment? Because I'm seeing Twitter and YouTube and so many big brands hopping on this. But is there anything that businesses should be doing now to get to prepare for this?
Yes, I think so. And I think we've come out and talked about this, and we're working on an article right now about it too. That, again, we'll go back to what I was saying earlier, that first of all, I think you need to understand, there's two bits that are part of this, right? First of all, you have to understand what is going on, educate yourself about what all these things are, right? They can be kind of confusing. They're kind of lumped together, maybe not so relational as you might think they are at first. I mean, crypto and NFTs, you can see the relationship with, but educate yourself about what are all the nuances here. What should we be thinking about? So, for example, cryptocurrency and mining crypto has had a lot. There's been some discussion around how it impacts the environment, right? Because it uses so much energy. So as a brand, you may find that crypto is something that you're interested in terms of the being aligned with from a technology perspective or from an audience perspective, but your values around environmentalism are such that cause you to sort of stay away from that most of those stories because of that. Because of that aspect. So I would say, follow the prescription that I was talking about earlier, getting to know yourself deeply and comprehensively, and defining yourself and sort of having that, centralized perspective that you can go back to over and over and over again. And even if you modify that over time, even if it evolves over time, you have this sort of baseline that you can go to and just say, yeah, this is how we feel about that. This is how we're going to address this going forward. That's how I would approach it.
And
it wasn't very technical, but
no, I was going to say that one of the things I find really interesting about this topic is it seems to have divided audiences entirely. On one side, you've got people saying it will change absolutely everything. It will tear down the lines between online and offline. And some people are quite reluctant and resistant to that change, saying, I don't want a Ready Player One lifestyle. I didn't sign up for this. Who wants this? So I'm curious, do you think the metaverse will live up to its hype, and what does it mean for brands? I mean, I suppose we could argue that when Bill Gates was talking about the internet in 1995,
right,
it was the same kind of resistance then, wasn't it?
There certainly was, and there was a lot of resistance in business to, it was hard to see how it was going to transform. I think people are just resistant to change, generally speaking. Yeah. But I see a parallel, just like you do, that there certainly could evolve, and it shows a lot of signs that it will evolve like the internet evolved. When we talk about crypto, that's another story. I think you kind of have to, like I was saying before, these things get lumped together, and I think if you separate them, you can start to think about them a little bit differently. So, like the metaverse, I think is an interesting. That sort of alternative reality, virtual reality, augmented reality environments. I think you're right. I think that it will evolve into something mainstream and have an impact on society. Crypto is a bit of a challenge, I think, because it could too. I'm not saying it's not, but I've always been fascinated with payments mechanism. Back at work, I mentioned I worked for the Federal Reserve at one point, and I was a product manager for what they called electronic payments at the time. So I was looking at the payments mechanism and all the things that the Fed was doing underlying, enabling, digital payments, right? Automated clearinghouse, et cetera, wire transfers. Those concepts were. I'm old enough that those concepts were revolutionary in their day, right? So I can see what's going on with crypto and how people would view that. It's interesting because I was watching this show. I think it was a CBS News. I think it was CBS Sunday Morning or something, where they actually did kind of a primer on crypto and Bitcoin, and one of the people that they interviewed was a woman who runs a bank, basically, and she said, it's probably the biggest bubble of our lifetime. But when you look at currency, regular currency today, there's really nothing underlying it. There was at one time something physical underlying it. There's nothing physical underlying it anymore. It's just that we all accept it. So I think as time goes on and more people accept it, it's possible that it could, it could grow and turn into something. Now, the contrarian approach right now is that it's probably got some bumps. There's probably some bumps in the road right now because of inflation. There was an article I was just reading by a guy who sort of predicted the downturn. When was it? Back in the 2000s, in the aughts. And what was this guy's name here? I think of Nassim Taleb. He was the author of that book, The Black Swan. And so he's warning now that that thing is starting to burst, because inflation is, and you can see that it's had an effect on crypto markets, right? Yeah. So I don't know. I feel like you have to educate yourself. You have to sort of as a brand leader, you sort of have to know the nuances and really know yourself and how you align with those things.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. And if I look back at my own career, for me, the two big moments that really mean something was the arrival of the internet and then the arrival of the iPhone in 2007 and how that led to mobile app stores and smartphones and things. And there's not really been that much that I can reflect on that was that big groundbreaking moment, apart from now, and all these Web3 trends seem to have that very same kind of parallel. But are there any big tech trends that excite you in this space?
Other than what we've spoken about so far? I mean, I'm really excited about the technology that we're building. I mean, and I think that, it goes beyond the space that we're in terms of media, media campaigns and then to marketing to be really applicable across many, many business functions. So I'm excited about, the fact that, we could be in this position if we're thinking about things and we have the vision that we have, that it could be something it's adaptable to a lot of functions in business, from HR to product management to finance to new business pitches, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot more to it than just media, I believe. So
we've kind of touched on this already, but before I let you go, as we've talked about, consumers are very savvy now. So for any business leaders listening, how can brands authentically and strategically connect with their consumers and keep authenticity in check? Is there any tips you can offer around that?
Other than what I've said already, so I can recap. The key is to go through an exercise, and of course, we have that in our platform. What we do is we help brands do this. We help them build their mentality profile, which is a detailed, comprehensive description of the brand's perspective or personality, if you want to put it that way. It includes all kinds of things like scenarios, many scenarios that we have, distilled in terms of what happens in the world today from a pattern perspective, and how you feel about those, and how your brand responds to those values, aspirations, aspirational brands, competitors, a lot of competitor information. Because a lot of times you respond to what goes on in your industry. It may not be a worldwide phenomenon. It might just be an industry, something going on in your industry, or something that a competitor does, right? All of the charitable causes or social issues or events that you that align with your brand or don't align with your brand, influencers, celebrities, again, inspirational leaders, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot of components to that. And once you sort of get all that collected and understood as your main source of truth or your centralized perspective, I think that helps you move with authenticity and consistency continuously. So it's some work. We have ways to help brands do that and do it all the time. So I think it's well worth the effort.
Well, I've loved chatting with you today about all this and so much more. But before I let you go, it's time to have a little bit of fun with you now, because I always like to finish the podcast by asking the guests if there was a song or book or anything that has inspired them that we can either add to our Spotify playlist or Amazon wish list. Is there anything that springs to mind that you'd like to add to our list?
Sure. Well, I'll give you a book and a song. How's that?
Oh, man, perfect.
All right. So the book is one called Your Brain on Story by a guy named Tom Asacker, Asacker. And it's a great book about how our brains have adopted the narrative structure and how we use this unintentionally to create a narrative in our brain that sort of drives our actions and our behaviors, where we are the central character of the story in our head, where in reality, we often are not the central character of what's going on in the world, but yet we try to turn this into something. So it's called Your Brain on Story, which I think is fascinating. And, all of the work that we're doing with narratives and stories, news stories and whatnot, it's kind of fascinating to me. From a song perspective, one of my favorite songs of all time, I go back to the classic rock era. It was a band called the Allman Brothers on an album called Eat a Peach. The song is Blue Sky. And it's just every time I hear it, it just lifts my spirits. It's one of those songs that I can put on and feel good anytime I hear it. And it's also got one of the best extended solos in the bridge, guitar solos in the bridge ever. So a really great song.
Oh, I love that. I'm sure I saw them a few years ago at Glastonbury as well. I'm sure I did. Great band. Well, I'll get that added to our Spotify playlist. And also, I'll add the book to the Amazon wish list, which I'm definitely going to check out. That sounds right up my street, especially with the importance based on narratives everywhere we look at the moment. It sounds excellent. But before I let you go, though, for anyone interested in just finding out more information about Sightly, what's the best way of finding you online and equally contacting your team if anyone's got any questions? You bet.
So, our website is at www.sightly.com, and that's SIGHTLY. So it's the positive, the opposite of unsightly. It's an actual word, so Sightly. And then we just launched our new version of the site, so love for you to check it out and give us some feedback. If you want to contact us, you could contact us at hello@sightly.com. And of course, we're also on LinkedIn. Our company page, as well as all of our employees, are on LinkedIn. So you can contact us that way as well.
Awesome. Well, I've loved hearing more about how brands can authentically and strategically connect with consumers, especially in an age where consumers are incredibly savvy and they can smell BS at 10 paces every time. But also hearing more about your story as well, the work you've done at Sightly and its brand mentality solution. So thank you so much for taking the time to share that with me today.
Thank you, Neil. It's been a pleasure getting to know you and chatting with you.
I cannot thank Robert enough for coming on the podcast today, and I'll definitely be picking up these book recommendations now because I'm fascinated by how we're all ruled by narratives now, and especially with social media promoting that main character syndrome, and also how some are trying to control that narrative. So I'll be checking that book out and I'll report back. But for everybody else, if you've got any questions, you want to come on the podcast or any insights to share, please email me now, techblogwriter@outlook.com. Follow me on Twitter at Neil C. Hughes and at Neil C. Hughes on LinkedIn too. Keep those questions coming over. So thank you for listening, and until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neil C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.